Part 1. Whispers in the Red Dust. The sun hung low over Deadwood Crossing like a dying ember, painting the dusty main street in shades of copper and rust. It was the kind of evening that made men reach for their whiskey and women hurry behind locked doors. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild enough to swallow a soul whole without anybody asking questions. Clara Monroe stood at the window of Hartley's General Store, her fingers pressed against the glass as she watched the world outside turn golden. At 23, she'd already lived more lives than most women, twice her age daughter, wife, widow. The last title clung to her like the black dress she couldn't afford to replace, a constant reminder of the bruises that had finally stopped blooming on her skin 6 months ago when Jake Monroe met his end in a saloon brawl. Mrs. Monroe. The shopkeeper's voice cut through her thoughts like a dull knife. About your husband's account. Clara's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. She knew what was coming, the same conversation she'd had with half the merchants in town since Jake died, leaving her with nothing but debts and a reputation as damaged as her late husband's fists had made her. I'll need something by week's end, Hartley continued, his tone apologetic but firm. Silas Crow's been asking about you. Says he might be willing to settle your debts if you're accommodating. The name sent ice through her veins. Silas Crow owned half of Deadwood Crossing and had his fingers in the other half. He collected debts the way some men collected scalps, with brutal efficiency and no mercy. I'll find a way, Clara said quietly, finally turning to face the shopkeeper. Her green eyes, once bright as spring grass, had dulled to the color of sage in drought. I always do. Outside, the evening stage rolled into town in a cloud of dust and horse sweat. Clara watched through the window as passengers climbed down, stretching stiff limbs and brushing trail dirt from their clothes. Among them, a lone rider dismounted from a bay stallion tied to the back of the coach. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable with long days in the saddle, his weathered duster speaking of countless miles under unforgiving skies. Ethan Cole had sworn he'd never return to Deadwood Crossing. The last time he'd ridden out, 5 years ago, he'd left as a different man, younger, angrier, still believing the cavalry insignia on his uniform meant something. Now, at 31, he carried his discharge papers in one pocket and a letter from his dead sister in the other, both reminders of promises he couldn't keep. He led his horse to the livery stable, ignoring the curious stares of townspeople who might remember him from before. The Cole Ranch sat empty 10 miles north of town, abandoned since the night Comanche raiders had painted its walls with his family's blood. He'd been away, serving his country, protecting strangers while his own kin died screaming. The guilt of it sat in his gut like a belly full of bad whiskey. Ethan Cole, the livery owner, old Pete, squinted at him through clouded eyes. Heard you was dead. Heard wrong, Ethan replied, handing over his horse's reins along with a silver dollar. Just passing through. Ain't we all? Pete muttered, leading the stallion into a stall. You planning on heading out to the old place? Maybe. Ethan's jaw tightened. Maybe not. He left before Pete could ask more questions, making his way toward the Broken Wheel Saloon. If he was going to face ghosts, he'd need whiskey to wash down the memories. The saloon was exactly as he remembered, loud, smoky, and full of men trying to forget why they'd come west in the first place. Ethan found an empty spot at the bar and ordered a bottle, not bothering with a glass. The first burn of liquor down his throat felt like coming home. He was 3 drinks deep when the commotion started. Now, Mrs. Monroe, no need to make this difficult. The voice belonged to a man in an expensive suit, his thick fingers wrapped around a woman's wrist. Mr. Crow is offering you a respectable arrangement. Work for Mr. Garrison as his companion, and your debts disappear. Ethan glanced over, recognizing the woman from the general store, the widow in black who'd been standing at the window like she was looking for escape routes. Up close, he could see the pride in the set of her jaw, the way she held herself despite the man's grip on her arm. "I'd rather starve," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That can be arranged too," the suit replied, his smile sharp as broken glass. "But Mr. Crow prefers the first option. Better for business. You understand." The saloon had gone quiet, the way it did when violence hung in the air like smoke before a prairie fire. Most men looked away, studying their cards or the bottom of their glasses. Nobody interfered with Silas Crow's business if they valued their health. Ethan took another pull from his bottle. Not his problem. He had enough ghosts without adding someone else's troubles to his collection. But then the suit yanked Clara forward, hard enough to make her stumble. And something in the way she caught herself proud and unbreaking despite everything reminded him of another woman who'd refused to bend. His sister Mary, who'd fought the raiders until her last breath. "The lady said no." The words were out before Ethan could stop them, his voice cutting through the saloon's tense silence. Every head turned. The suit's eyes narrowed, taking in Ethan's trail-worn appearance and the army coat visible beneath his open duster. "This ain't your concern, stranger." "Reckon it is now." Ethan stood slowly, the whiskey warm in his belly but his mind sharp. 5 years of cavalry service had taught him to read a room, and this one was balanced on a knife's edge. "Let her go." "You know who I work for?" "Don't much care." The suit's free hand moved toward his vest, where the bulge of a hideout gun was visible. Ethan was faster. His coat cleared leather and leveled at the man's chest before anyone could blink. "Let her go!" For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the suit released Clara's wrist, his hands raising slowly. "Mr. Crow won't forget this." "Good," Ethan said. "Neither will I." The suit backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Ethan's gun. "This ain't over. Mrs. Monroe, you neither. Cowboy." When he was gone, the saloon gradually returned to its normal chaos, though Ethan noticed more than a few men giving him a wide berth. He holstered his Colt and turned to Clara, who stood rubbing her wrist, her face pale but composed. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Seemed like I did." He studied her for a moment, seeing the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting battles nobody else could see. "You got somewhere safe to go?" Clara's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "If I did, you think I'd be here?" Ethan made a decision he'd probably regret come morning. "I got a ranch north of town. It ain't much been empty a while, but it's got walls and a roof. You're welcome to it until you figure things out." She stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Maybe that's why." He picked up his bottle, took a last swallow, and set it on the bar. "Name's Ethan Cole. I'll be at the livery at sunrise if you're interested. If not, well, you won't see me again." He touched his hat brim and walked out, leaving Clara Monroe standing in the middle of the broken wheel, wondering if she'd just met salvation or another kind of damnation. Outside, Deadwood Crossing settled into evening, the sky fading from copper to purple to black. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, its cry carrying across the empty plains like a warning. Change was coming to the territories, whether in the form of civilization or chaos. Nobody could say. But for now, in this moment, a widow and a drifter had crossed paths in a broken-down mining town, setting in motion a story that would be whispered about in these parts for years to come, a story of debts and courage, of ghosts and new beginnings, of two damaged souls finding something worth fighting for in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the American frontier. The red dust settled on the empty street, and the stars began their nightly vigil, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath them. But tomorrow would come, as it always did in the West, bringing with it the promise of gunfire or redemption. Sometimes, if a body was lucky, it brought both. Part 2. Shadows on the Valley. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned coal ranch as Clara Monroe stood beside Ethan's wagon, her few possessions wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket at her feet. The 10-mile journey from Deadwood Crossing had been silent save for the creak of wheels and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Now, facing the charred remains of what had once been a home, she wondered if she'd traded one form of desolation for another. "Fire took the main house," Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral as he helped her down from the wagon. "But the old foreman's cabin still stands. It ain't pretty, but it's solid." Clara followed his gaze to a small log structure set back from the ruins. Weeds grew tall around its foundation, and the windows were clouded with years of dust. But the roof looked intact, after months of dodging creditors and sleeping with one eye open. Even this neglected shelter felt like sanctuary. "Why didn't you rebuild?" she asked, watching Ethan's face harden as he surveyed his former home. "Some things are better left buried." He grabbed her bundle and started toward the cabin. "Come on, let's see what we're working with." The door protested on rusty hinges as Ethan shouldered it open. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. The cabin consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A ladder led to a small loft above. "There's a well out back," Ethan said, setting down her belongings. "Should still be good. I'll check the chimney for birds' nests before you light a fire." Clara moved to the window, rubbing a clear spot in the glass with her sleeve. The view stretched across a valley bordered by distant mountains, their peaks already white with early snow. Beautiful and merciless, like everything else in this territory. "Hey, Mr. Cole," she began, then stopped. "Ethan, I need to know what you expect in return for this kindness." He paused in his inspection of the fireplace, turning to meet her eyes. "Nothing you ain't willing to give freely." "Men always expect something." "Maybe so." He went back to checking the chimney. "But I ain't most men. You need a place to stay. I got a place sitting empty. That's all there is to it." Clara wanted to believe him, but Jake had been kind too. In the beginning, she'd learned that kindness could turn to cruelty quicker than prairie weather. Over the next days, they fell into an uneasy rhythm. Ethan slept in the barn with his horse, coming to the cabin only for meals that Clara insisted on cooking from the supplies he'd brought from town. She attacked the cabin's neglect with fierce determination, scrubbing years of grime from windows and floors, as if cleaning could somehow scour away her own past. On the 4th morning, Clara woke to find a rifle propped beside the door, along with a box of cartridges. "Wolves come down from the mountains when they're hungry," Ethan explained over breakfast. "Need you to be able to protect yourself when I'm not around." "You're leaving." "Got to earn money somehow. Rancher named Sullivan needs hands for a cattle drive to Denver. I'll be gone 2 weeks, maybe 3. Clara's fingers tightened on her coffee cup. The thought of being alone out here, miles from anywhere, sent cold fear through her belly. But worse was the realization that she'd already grown dependent on his quiet presence. "I've never shot a rifle," she admitted. "Then we'd best fix that." He spent the morning teaching her to load, aim, and fire. Clara's shoulder ached from the recoil, but by noon she could hit a tin can at 30 paces. When Ethan nodded his approval, she felt an unfamiliar surge of pride. "You're a quick study," he said, watching her reload with steady hands. "Most important thing is staying calm. Panic'll get you killed faster than any wolf." That evening, as Clara prepared their last supper before his departure, she found herself stealing glances at him. In the lamplight, she could see lines carved by sun and sorrow around his eyes. The way his hands moved with practiced efficiency, whether handling a gun or mending harness. He was handsome in the way of men shaped by hard country, nothing pretty about him, but something solid and true. "Can I ask you something?" she ventured as they ate. He looked up from his plate. "Shoot. What happened here to your family? Ethan's jaw worked silently for a moment. Comanche raid, summer of '70. I was stationed at Fort Grant, 200 miles away. He pushed beans around his plate with his fork. My sister Mary. She was 16, fought them hard enough they had to burn the house to get her out. Parents were already dead by then. I'm sorry. Yeah. He stood abruptly, carrying his plate to the wash basin. We all got things we're sorry for. That night, unable to sleep, Clara climbed to the loft and found a trunk tucked under the eaves. Inside were remnants of the Cole family's life photographs, letters, a young girl's hair ribbons. One photo showed a family of 4 standing before the main house in its glory days. Ethan, maybe 15, grinned at the camera with an easy confidence she'd never seen in the man he'd become. His sister stood beside him, pretty and fierce-looking even in a daguerreotype. She carefully returned everything to the trunk, understanding now why Ethan slept in the barn. This cabin held too many ghosts. He left before dawn, stopping at the cabin door to hand her a leather pouch heavy with coins. For supplies, there's a trader comes through every 2 weeks, parks his wagon where the road forks. Name's Hobson, he's honest enough. Ethan. She caught his sleeve as he turned to go. Thank you for everything. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth that made her breath catch. Then he touched his hat brim and was gone, his silhouette disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. The first week alone tested every bit of courage Clara possessed. Wolves did come, circling the cabin at night with eyes that glowed green in the darkness. She sat up with the rifle across her knees, remembering Ethan's words about staying calm. On the 3rd night, she shot one that got too close to the door. The others melted back into the darkness, and she spent the rest of the night shaking, the rifle still clutched in her hands. Days were easier. She found seeds in the barn and turned earth for a kitchen garden, though it was late in the season for planting. She mended the fence around the well, taught herself to catch rabbits with snares, and slowly began to feel something she hadn't experienced since before her marriage competence. The trader Hobson arrived on schedule, a grizzled man with kind eyes who didn't ask questions about a woman living alone on an abandoned ranch. He sold her flour, coffee, salt pork, and ammunition, throwing in a packet of needles when he learned she could sew. Cole's a good man, he said as he prepared to leave. Knew his family. Shame what happened. Yes, Clara agreed, though she wondered if Ethan would ever be able to see past that shame. The second week brought storms. Thunder rolled across the valley like artillery fire, and rain turned the yard to mud. The cabin roof leaked in 2 places, and Clara set pots to catch the drips, grateful for even this imperfect shelter. During a break in the weather, she ventured to the burned house, salvaging usable lumber and a few pieces of ironwork that had survived the fire. She was dragging a partially charred beam back to the cabin when she heard horses approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking Ethan had returned early. But the 3 riders who appeared were strangers. Their leader, a man with pale eyes and a scar across his throat, touched his hat in mock courtesy. Afternoon, ma'am. Didn't expect to find anyone out here. Clara's rifle was inside the cabin, 20 feet away. She kept her voice steady. Just passing through myself. That's so. Scarthroat dismounted, his companions following suit. Funny, heard in town that Cole took in a woman. Heard she was a pretty widow with debts to pay. You heard wrong. He smiled, showing too many teeth. Don't think I did, mister. Crow sent us to make an offer. You come back peaceful-like. He'll forget about that business in the saloon. Might even reduce what your late husband owed. And if I refuse, well now, that'd be unfortunate, for you and Cole both. Clara's mind raced. 3 men, all armed, between her and the cabin. But the burned timber in her hands was solid, and years of Jake's temper had taught her to fight dirty when cornered. I need to get my things, she said, letting her shoulders slump in defeat. Smart woman. Scarthroat stepped aside to let her pass. Clara took 2 steps, then spun, swinging the timber with all her strength. It caught him across the temple with a sound like a melon dropping. She didn't wait to see him fall, just ran for the cabin as his companions shouted in surprise. She made it to the door, grabbed the rifle, and turned as the first man cleared leather. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second man dove for cover behind the well. "You're gonna pay for that!" he yelled. Clara's hands were steady as she worked the rifle's lever, chambering another round. "Tell Crow I'm not for sale. Not now. Not ever." A tense standoff followed. Scarthroat groaned in the mud. His companion cursed over his bleeding shoulder, and the third man stayed hidden. Finally, he called out, "This ain't over." "It is today." Clara replied, "Get your friends and go. Next shot won't be to wound." They left, Scarthroat slung over a saddle like a sack of grain, threats and curses trailing behind them. Clara kept the rifle trained on them until they disappeared over the ridge, then sank to her knees in the doorway, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. That's how Ethan found her an hour later when he rode in, trail-weary and concerned by the signs of trouble in the yard. She was still kneeling there, rifle across her lap, staring at the horizon like she expected an army to come pouring over it. "Clara!" He swung down from his horse, approaching carefully. "What happened?" "The dam broke." Words tumbled out of her crow's men. The fight, the threats. Ethan listened in silence, his face darkening with each detail. When she finished, he helped her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. "You did good," he said quietly. "Real good. They won't be back tonight." "How can you be sure?" "Because men like that are cowards. They prey on the weak, and you just showed them you ain't weak." He guided her inside, settling her in a chair before checking the rifle and barring the door. "But Crow won't let this go. We need to be ready." Clara looked up at him, searching his face. "You think I'd leave you to face this alone?" His voice roughened with something that might have been anger, or might have been something else entirely. "Not happening." For the first time since Jake died, Clara felt tears threaten, not from fear or sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of not being alone. She blinked them back, unwilling to show that weakness. "The cattle drive," she managed. "Did you?" "Got paid in full? We'll have enough to get through winter. Maybe hire some hands come spring." He paused, seeming to realize what he'd said. "If you're planning to stay, that is." Clara thought of the garden she'd planted, the fence she'd mended, the way the morning sun looked through clean windows. She thought of town, where whispers followed her like shadows, where men like Crow saw her as property to be claimed. "I've got nowhere else to go," she said simply. "That ain't a reason to stay." She met his eyes then, seeing in them the same loneliness that lived in her own chest. "Maybe not, but it's a start." Outside, thunder rumbled again, promising more storms to come. But inside the small cabin, lamplight pushed back the darkness, and two damaged souls began to realize they might not have to face those storms alone. Part 3. The Forest and the Fire. October arrived with frost on the ground and worry in the air. Word from town, carried by the trader Hobson, confirmed what Ethan had suspected. Silas Crow was gathering men, offering good money for guns willing to ride north. The attack on Clara had wounded more than flesh. It had wounded pride. And in the territories, pride often demanded blood in payment. 20 men, maybe more, Hobson reported, accepting coffee from Clara with a grateful nod. "Crow's telling folks you shot his men unprovoked, that you're squatters on land that rightfully belongs to him." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "This land belongs to the bank in Denver, and they're happy enough to leave it rot. Crow just wants what he can't have." "Maybe so," Hobson agreed, "but that won't stop him from taking it." After the trader left, Ethan found Clara standing at the edge of the burned forest that bordered the ranch. Fire had swept through years ago, leaving behind a cemetery of blackened pines. New growth pushed through in places young saplings reaching toward light between the scarred trunks. "It's coming back," Clara observed, touching a green shoot. "Even after all that destruction. Land's got a way of healing itself," Ethan said. "People are harder." She turned to study him. In the weeks since Crow's men had come, she'd watched Ethan rebuild defensive positions around the cabin, teaching her to shoot from cover, to read the land like a soldier. But at night, she heard him walking the perimeter, unable to sleep, fighting battles that existed only in memory. "You blame yourself," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Wouldn't you?" His voice was rough. "I chose the army over family, chose glory over being here when they needed me." "You couldn't have known." "But I should have." He kicked at a charred log, sending up a cloud of ash. "Mary wrote me, told me about the raids getting worse. I told her the army would protect them, told her I was doing important work." His laugh was harsh. "Important work, while my family burned." Clara reached for his hand, surprised when he didn't pull away. His fingers were calloused, scarred from rope and rain, but gentle as they closed around hers. "We can't change what's done," she said, "but we can choose what comes next." He looked at their joined hands, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. "Why'd you stay?" "Clara, really?" The question hung between them like morning mist. Clara thought of all the safe answers she could give, then decided on truth. "Because for the first time since I was a girl, I get to choose. Not my father, not my husband, not my debts. Me." She squeezed his hand. "And I choose this. Choose to fight for something worth having. Even if it gets you killed." "We're all dying anyway. Might as well do it standing up." That night, Ethan didn't walk the perimeter. Instead, he sat with Clara by the fire, teaching her to play cards with a worn deck he'd carried through 5 years of military service. She laughed when she won, accusing him of letting her, and he found himself smiling more than he had in years. "Tell me about before," Clara said, dealing another hand. "Before the army, before everything." So he did. Told her about breaking horses with his father, about his mother's apple pie, about teaching Mary to shoot despite their parents' disapproval. The memories hurt, but less than usual, like old wounds finally allowed to breathe. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "Mary, she had your kind of steel." Clara's eyes softened. "I would have liked to know her." They were still talking when dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. Ethan realized with surprise that he'd spent an entire night without seeing ghosts in every shadow. When Clara finally retired to the loft, he remained by the dying fire, pondering the strange lightness in his chest. 3 days later, riders appeared on the southern ridge. Not Crow's men, these were Apache. 6 of them, moving with the easy grace of people who belonged to this land in ways white settlers never would. Ethan met them in the yard, hands visible but near his guns. Their leader, a man with silver threading his black hair, studied Ethan with knowing eyes. "You are the soldier who lived here before." "I am." "Your family fought well. We remember." Ethan's throat tightened. Not well enough. The Apache leader dismounted, gesturing for his companions to stay back. "I am called Broken Arrow. We have watched Crow gather men, watched him speak of taking this land. He brings war to the valley." "Why tell me?" "Because Crow sells whiskey to our young men, fills them with poison and lies. Because he pays hunters to kill buffalo and leave them to rot, starving us into submission." Broken Arrow's face hardened. "And because a warrior who returns to face his ghosts deserves respect." From inside the cabin, Clara watched through the window, rifle ready but held low. She saw Ethan and the Apache leader talk, saw something pass between them, understanding, perhaps a recognition of shared losses. "Crow will come with the new moon," Broken Arrow said. 3 nights from now, When darkness favors attack, he has 23 men, plus the 3 you wounded. They plan to burn you out, take the woman, make an example. You could have let it happen. Why warn us? Because the enemy of my enemy may not be my friend, but deserves a chance to prove himself. The Apache remounted, his warriors shifting like shadows. We will be watching. Soldier, choose your ground well. They melted back into the landscape, leaving Ethan standing alone in the yard. Clara emerged from the cabin, questions in her eyes. We have 3 days, he told her. Time to decide if we run or fight. I thought we already decided that. He looked at her, really looked at her, saw the determined set of her jaw, the steady way she held the rifle, the fire in her eyes that no amount of hardship had managed to extinguish. In that moment, he understood something that had been building since the night he'd intervened at the saloon. I won't let them take you, he said, the words fierce with promise. I know. Her voice was soft but certain. Just like I won't let them take our home. Our home? The words hung in the air like a covenant. Without thinking, Ethan reached out, cupping her face in his hands. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Clara, he whispered, thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. I know, she said again. Me too. He kissed her then, standing in the yard where his family had died, where new life was struggling to take root. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both made of glass. Then Clara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and gentleness gave way to desperate need for connection, for affirmation of life in the face of approaching death. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. This complicates things. Clara's laugh was shaky but real. Everything about us is complicated. They spent the next 3 days preparing for siege. Ethan showed Clara how to barricade windows, how to move between defensive positions without exposing herself to fire. They filled every available container with water, stocked ammunition in strategic locations, and created fallback positions in case the cabin was overrun. On the second night, as they worked by lamplight to reinforce the door, Clara asked, "What if we can't hold them?" "Then we make them pay dear for every inch." Ethan's face was grim. "But I've got one advantage Crow doesn't know about." "What's that?" "I spent 5 years learning how to fight men who were better at this land than I was. Learned from them, too. Crow expects a straight fight. He won't get one." The final day dawned clear and cold. They completed their preparations in silence, the weight of approaching violence hanging over them like storm clouds. As afternoon faded to evening, Clara found herself standing again at the edge of the burned forest. "Scared?" Ethan asked, joining her. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of dying." "What then?" She turned to face him, memorizing every line of his face in the dying light. "Of not having enough time, of finding you just to lose you." He pulled her close, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "Whatever happens tonight, know this: you saved me. Clara Monroe gave me something to fight for besides ghosts." "You saved me first," she whispered against his chest. They stood there as darkness fell. Two souls who'd found each other in the ashes of their former lives. Tomorrow would bring fire and blood, the ultimate test of their resolve. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. The new moon rose invisible in a star-filled sky. Somewhere in the darkness, horses moved and men checked weapons. The burned forest stood sentinel, its scarred trees a reminder that destruction was not always the end. Sometimes it was just the beginning. Part 4. Yes, right there. The attack came at midnight. Not with the thunder of hooves Ethan had expected, but with the whisper of boots on frost-brittle grass. He'd positioned himself in the loft, rifle ready, while Clara waited below with ammunition and medical supplies. The first sign of trouble was a flaming arrow that thudded into the cabin wall. "Fire!" Clara shouted, already moving with the bucket of sand they'd prepared. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions as Crow's men opened up on the cabin. Ethan returned fire methodically, picking his targets, making every shot count. Below. Clara doused the burning arrow and took position at the side window. "How many?" she called out. 8, maybe 10 out front. More coming around the sides." The siege had begun. For an hour, they held their ground. Ethan's military training showed in his disciplined fire, never wasting ammunition, keeping Crow's men pinned down. Clara proved herself his equal, her shots careful but effective. When a man tried to rush the door, her bullet sent him spinning back into the darkness. Then everything changed. "Cole," Crow's voice carried across the yard. "This doesn't have to end in blood. Send out the woman and you can ride away." "Go to hell, Crow!" Ethan shouted back. Didn't care for the company. Crow's laugh was cold. "Last chance, soldier boy." The answer was another shot from Ethan's rifle, close enough to Crow's position to send him diving for cover. What followed was chaos. Crow's men rushed from multiple directions, some laying down cover fire while others charged with torches. Ethan dropped 2 before they reached the cabin, but a third managed to fling his torch onto the roof before Clara's shot brought him down. "The roof's caught!" she yelled, seeing flames beginning to spread across the dry shingles. "Keep shooting, make them pay for every inch." But Ethan knew they were in trouble. Fire above, enemies all around. Limited ammunition. This was how his family had died trapped. Burning, fighting to the last, history repeating itself in cruel symmetry. Then the unexpected happened. War cries split the night as Broken Arrow and his warriors materialized from the darkness like avenging spirits. They hit Crow's flanks hard, bows singing, rifles cracking. Suddenly, the attackers found themselves caught between the cabin's defenders and Apache fury. "What the hell?" Clara gasped, watching Crow's men scatter in confusion. "Sometimes the enemy of your enemy," Ethan muttered, picking off a fleeing gunman. The tide had turned, but the roof still burned. Smoke filled the cabin, making it hard to see, harder to breathe. Clara coughed, tears streaming from stinging eyes. "We have to get out," Ethan called, climbing down from the loft. They prepared to make a break for it when the door exploded inward. 3 of Crow's men burst through. Having circled back in the chaos, the cabin became a close-quarters battleground. Ethan's rifle was too long for the tight space. He reversed it, using the butt as a club, catching one man across the jaw. Another grappled with him, trying to wrestle the weapon away. The third advanced on Clara. She fired, but the hammer fell on an empty chamber. The man grinned, raising his pistol. Time slowed. Clara threw herself sideways as the gun boomed, feeling the bullet tug at her dress. She grabbed the poker from the fireplace, swinging it with desperate strength. It connected with his knee, dropping him with a howl. Ethan had managed to draw his Colt, putting 2 bullets into his attacker. He spun to help Clara, but found her standing over her downed opponent, poker raised like a club, face fierce with determination. "Behind you!" she screamed. He turned to find the first man, jaw broken but still fighting, lunging with a knife. Ethan caught his wrist, the 2 men crashing into the wall. The blade inched toward his throat as they struggled. Clara didn't hesitate. She brought the poker down hard on the attacker's head. He collapsed, the knife clattering across the floor. For a moment, they stood in the smoke-filled cabin, breathing hard, staring at each other across the bodies of their enemies. Then the roof beam above them cracked ominously. "Out now!" Ethan grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward the door. They burst into the yard to find the battle had moved away from the cabin. Broken Arrow's warriors had driven Crow's men toward the burned forest, where shadows and charred trees turned the fight into a nightmare of ambush and confusion. Ethan pulled Clara behind the well's stone wall as bullets whined overhead. She was coughing from the smoke, her dress torn and singed, but her eyes were alert. "You hurt?" he asked, hands checking her for wounds. "No, you—" "I'm fine." He risked a glance over the well's rim. "Looks like Crow's men are breaking, but where's—" "Looking for me, Cole." They spun to find Silas Crow himself standing 10 feet away, pistol leveled. His expensive suit was torn and dirty, his carefully waxed mustache singed, but his eyes held the cold fury of a man who'd lost everything. "Should have taken my offer, Mrs. Monroe," he said. "Would have saved us all this trouble." "I'd rather burn." Clara spat. "Funny you should say that." Crow's smile was a death's head grin. "Since that's exactly what's about to happen?" Ethan shifted, trying to shield Clara, his hand inching toward his holster. Crow tracked the movement. "Don't try it, soldier boy. I'll put 2 in you and still have 4 for her." "You're finished, Crow," Ethan said. "Your men are scattered. The Apache." "Savages and traitors? All of them. But I'll deal with them later. Right now, it's just about us. About teaching people what happens when they cross Silas Crow." Behind them, the cabin roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The fire's light danced across Crow's face, making him look demonic. He savored the moment, the gun steady in his hand. "You know what your problem is. Cole, you think there are rules out here. Honor, justice." He laughed. "There's only power and those too weak to take it." Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, ready to make a desperate play. She knew he'd die trying to protect her. In that moment, something crystallized within her, not fear, not resignation, but fierce determination. She'd been a victim long enough. Her hand found Ethan's, squeezing once. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "You're wrong, Crow. There's also choice, and I choose." She moved faster than either man expected, shoving Ethan aside while diving the opposite direction. Crow's gun tracked her movement, firing once, twice. Clara felt fire bloom across her shoulder but kept rolling, coming up with the dropped knife from the cabin fight. Ethan's coat cleared leather as Crow tried to adjust his aim. 2 guns spoke as one. Crow staggered, looking down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his vest. His gun wavered, tried to rise again. Clara's thrown knife took him in the throat. Silas Crow dropped to his knees, then fell forward, his blood soaking into soil that had already seen too much death. His eyes, still wide with disbelief, stared at nothing. "Clara!" Ethan was at her side instantly, easing her back against the well. Blood seeped between her fingers where she pressed against her shoulder. Just a graze," she managed, though her face was pale. "Did we win?" "Yeah, darling, we won." The Apache had finished mopping up Crow's scattered forces. Broken Arrow appeared from the darkness, taking in the scene, the burning cabin, the dead man, the wounded woman in Ethan's arms. "The debt is paid," he said simply. "This valley knows peace again." As the warriors melted back into the night, Ethan worked by firelight to clean and bandage Clara's wound. It was indeed more graze than serious injury, the bullet having carved a furrow across her shoulder rather than finding deeper purchase. "Hold still," he murmured, his hands infinitely gentle. "This is going to sting." Clara bit her lip as he cleaned the wound with whiskey from his flask. The pain was sharp but bearable. Nothing compared to what she'd endured in her marriage. What made her tremble was Ethan's touch, the concern in his eyes, the way he handled her like something precious. "There," he said, tying off the bandage. "You'll have a scar, but—" "Another one for the collection," she said, trying for lightness. His fingers stilled on her shoulder. "Clara." "It's all right." She covered his hand with hers. "We're alive. That's what matters." The cabin was a total loss. Flames consuming the last of the walls as they watched. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought to protect, reduced to ash and memory. But as Clara leaned against Ethan's chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady, She realized home wasn't walls and roof. It was this two people choosing each other against all odds. "Yes," she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it. "What?" She turned in his arms, meeting his eyes in the firelight. "Earlier, Crow said there were no rules out here. He was wrong. There's one rule: we make our own choices. And I choose you. Ethan Cole, yes to you, to us, to whatever comes next." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You sure I've got nothing to offer but hard work and harder ground? No house now, no—" "Right there," she interrupted, pressing her hand over his heart. "That's all I need, just that." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring all the words he couldn't say into the connection. When they broke apart, both were trembling. "I won't miss," he whispered against her lips, echoing Crow's words but transforming them into a promise. "Won't miss a chance to love you, to build something real with you. Won't miss this time." She shivered, but not from cold or pain. "Neither will I." They held each other as the cabin finished its burning, as dawn crept across the valley, revealing the cost of the night's violence. Bodies to be buried, structures to rebuild, a future to be carved from loss and hope in equal measure. But in that moment, with his fingers found her hand, holding tight, they were simply two souls who discovered that sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't fighting or dying. It was choosing to live, to love, despite all the reasons not to. The old life had burned away with the cabin. What emerged from those ashes, like the green shoots in the burned forest, would be something entirely new, something worth the price they'd paid to find it. Part 5. The Price of Justice. News traveled fast in the territories. Within a week of Silas Crow's death, half of Deadwood Crossing knew the tale, though each telling grew more elaborate than the last. By the time Sheriff William Hartley rode out to the Cole Ranch with 6 armed deputies, the story had Clara fighting off 50 men single-handed while Ethan wrestled bears. They were living in the barn while rebuilding the cabin, making do with what they'd salvaged and what neighbors had begun to donate. The arrival of the law sent ice through Clara's veins. "Mrs. Monroe." The sheriff tipped his hat, though his hand rested on his pistol. "Mr. Cole, heard you had some trouble out here." Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. "Trouble's done with, Sheriff. Men who started it are buried or run off." "So I hear." Hartley's weathered face was unreadable. "Also hear tell Silas Crow died on your property. Man like that, with his connections, well, his death raises questions." "He came here with 20-some men to burn us out," Clara said, stepping around Ethan despite his protective gesture. What questions could there be? Questions like why a respectable businessman would ride all the way out here in the middle of the night. Questions about who fired first. Questions about whether this was self-defense or murder. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You know damn well what Crow was." "What I know and what I can prove in front of a judge are different things." Hartley shifted in his saddle. "I've got orders to bring you both in for questioning. Judge Morrison's coming through next week. Wants to hear the facts proper." Clara felt the familiar trap closing. The law had never protected her from Jake's fists, had looked the other way when Crow tried to claim her like property. Now it came calling when she finally defended herself. "We'll come peaceful," Ethan said before Clara could voice her anger. "But Clara's been wounded. She rides with me, not under guard like a criminal." Hartley studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but don't make me regret it, Cole." The ride to town felt like a funeral procession. Clara, her shoulders still tender beneath fresh bandages, pressed close to Ethan on his horse. Neither spoke, but she could feel the tension in his body, the way his hand kept drifting to his gun before he caught himself. Deadwood Crossing looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, its pretensions to civilization showing threadbare at the edges. People stopped to stare as they passed. Some with sympathy, others with the hungry look of those who fed on scandal. At the jail, Hartley surprised them. Instead of cells, he led them to his office, gesturing to chairs across from his cluttered desk. "Coffee," he offered, pouring 3 cups without waiting for an answer. "Now then, I need to hear it straight. All of it." For the next hour, they recounted the events: Clara's debt, the confrontation at the saloon, the escalating threats, the final attack. Hartley took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just listening. "The Apache," he asked when they mentioned Broken Arrow's intervention, "saved our lives," Ethan said firmly. "Crow was selling them poisoned whiskey, killing their buffalo. They had as much right to justice as we did." Hartley sighed, rubbing his face. "Cole, you know I served with your father back in the day? Good man. What happened to your family? Nobody deserved that." He looked at Clara. "And you, ma'am. The whole town knows what Jake Monroe was. But Crow had friends, powerful ones. They're demanding someone pay for his death. So justice only matters when rich men die." Clara's voice was bitter. "No, ma'am, but politics always matters, and dead rich men make for powerful politics." Hartley pulled out a leather folder. "Which is why I did some investigating of my own, found some interesting papers in Crow's safe." He spread documents across the desk. IOUs, contracts, correspondence. Clara recognized her husband's drunken scrawl on several. "Seems Mr. Crow was in the business of creating debts, not just collecting them," Hartley continued. "Watered drinks, rigged games, forged signatures. Your husband's debt? Mrs. Monroe. Near as I can figure, started at $50. By the time Crow's interest and fees were done, it was $500. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. "Jake was a fool and worse, but even he wouldn't have gambled that much." "No, ma'am, he wouldn't. And there's more." Hartley pulled out another paper. "Letter from Crow to a business associate in Denver, dated 2 weeks ago. Mentions his plans to acquire the Cole Ranch through foreclosure or other means. Seems he had buyers lined up for the land, some Eastern company wanting to run cattle." Ethan leaned forward. "He orchestrated all of it, the debt, the pressure on Clara, everything." "That's how it reads to me." Hartley gathered the papers. "Course, a cynical man might say I could have forged these myself, being as how Crow's not here to dispute them." "Sheriff," Clara began, but he held up a hand. "Good thing I'm not a cynical man, and good thing Judge Morrison owes me a favor or two from the war." He stood, extending his hand to Ethan. "You folks are free to go. I'll present these findings to the judge when he arrives. Expect he'll rule self-defense, maybe even commend you for standing up to corruption." Clara felt tears threaten for the second time in a week. "Why help us?" "Because the law is supposed to protect folks, not prey on them. Been looking the other way too long in this town. Letting men like Crow run things because it was easier." Hartley's face hardened. "Your standing up to him gave others courage to come forward. Got a dozen complaints this week: extortion, threats, worse. You did this town a service." They were at the door when Hartley called after them. "Cole, your parents would be proud. Both of you." Outside, Clara sagged against Ethan, relief making her knees weak. He held her steady, his own emotion carefully controlled. "It's not over," she said. "Crow's associates, the Eastern buyers." "No, it's not over, but we won something today." He helped her mount his horse. "Come on, let's go home." The ride back was different. The weight of impending judgment lifted. As they passed through town, Clara noticed something else had changed. The stairs were still there, but now mixed with something like respect. Mrs. Paulson from the boarding house actually smiled. Tom Martinez touched his hat brim in acknowledgement. At the general store, they found a surprise. Stacked on the porch were supplies lumber, nails, a new glass window, sacks of flour and beans. Pinned to one board was a note in careful script. For neighbors who stand tall. Citizens of Deadwood Crossing. Would you look at that? Ethan murmured. Mr. Hartley emerged from the store, ledger in hand. Been coming in all morning. Folks want to help rebuild. Even got a collection going to clear your remaining debts. Mrs. Monroe or Miss... Clara flushed. In the chaos, she'd almost forgotten she still carried Jake's name like a shackle. Monroe's fine for now, she said, glancing at Ethan. They loaded what they could carry, promising to return for the rest. As they prepared to leave, Hartley cleared his throat awkwardly. There's something else. Preacher Williams says he's available if you folks were considering... That is, if you wanted to make things official-like. He reddened. Not that it's any of my business, but the whole town's talking, and proper documentation might head off any more property disputes. Clara felt Ethan go still beside her. Marriage, after everything she'd endured with Jake, the word itself made her stomach clench. But this would be different. Wouldn't it? A choice? Not an arrangement. Partnership, not ownership. We'll think on it, Ethan said carefully. Thank you. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought. As they unloaded supplies at the barn, Clara finally broke the silence. You don't have to marry me to protect me, she said. I won't be any man's obligation again. Ethan set down the sack he was carrying, turning to face her. Is that what you think, that I'd marry you out of duty? Wouldn't you to secure the property rights, to stop gossip? Clara. He caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. If I marry you when I marry you, it'll be because I can't imagine facing another dawn without you beside me. Because you make me want to build instead of destroy. Because I love you with every broken piece of my heart. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Clara searched his face, finding only truth in his eyes. I'm scared, she admitted. Marriage nearly killed me once. I know, and if you need time, you'll have it. If you never want to marry again, we'll find another way. But Clara, his thumbs brushed over her knuckles. I'm not Jake, and you're not the woman he tried to break. You're the woman who faced down Silas Crow, who held off 20 men, who chose to fight rather than run. You're magnificent. She laughed, shaky but real. Magnificent, I'm a widow with debts, a bullet scar, and enough baggage to fill a freight wagon. And I'm a broken soldier who let his family die, who hid in a bottle for years rather than face the truth. He drew her closer. Maybe that's why we fit. Both too damaged for pretty fairy tales, but stubborn enough to build something real from the rubble. That evening, as they worked side by side to frame the new cabin, Clara made her decision. Not based on fear or propriety, or what the town expected, but on the simple truth that had taken root in her heart. Yes, she said suddenly, causing Ethan to look up from the board he was sawing. Yes, to your question, the one you'll ask when you're ready. She smiled at his confusion. I'm saying yes now, so you don't have to wonder. When you're ready, Ethan Cole, I'll marry you. Not for protection or property or to quiet gossips, but because I love you too, with all my broken pieces. He set down the saw, crossed to her in 3 strides, and kissed her soundly. When they parted, both were grinning like fools. How about tomorrow? He asked. Is tomorrow ready enough? Tomorrow's perfect. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of hope, they returned to work. The new cabin would be smaller than the old one, but stronger, built with hard-won knowledge and community support. Like their love, it would rise from ashes, defying those who'd tried to destroy it. Justice had been served, though not in the way anyone expected. Sometimes, Clara reflected, justice wasn't about law books or judges. Sometimes it was about people finding the courage to stand up, to choose love over fear, to build rather than burn. And sometimes It was about second chances blooming in the most unlikely ground. Part 6. Night of Blood on the Prairie. Winter arrived early that year, November bringing snow that turned the valley white as old bones. Ethan and Clara had married in October, a simple ceremony with half the town in attendance. Their vows spoken in the half-built cabin they were raising together. The preacher had smiled when Clara promised to stand beside, not behind, her husband. And Ethan's eyes had shone when he pledged to honor her choices as he honored her heart. Now, a month later, Clara stood at their new window, a wedding gift from the townspeople watching snow fall on ground that had known too much violence. Her shoulder barely ached anymore, the scar a pale reminder of prices paid. Behind her, Ethan worked on a cradle, though they hadn't spoken yet of children. It was his winter project, he said, something to keep his hands busy during the long evenings. "Riders coming," she said, squinting through the swirling white. Ethan set down his tools, moving to join her. 3 figures approached through the snow, and Clara relaxed as she recognized Sheriff Hartley's distinctive slouch in the saddle. "What brings you out in this weather?" Ethan asked as the men dismounted, stomping snow from their boots. Hartley's face was grim. "Wish it was social, but we got trouble. Samuel Grimes broke out of prison 2 days ago. He's been spotted heading this direction." Clara's blood chilled. Samuel Grimes Crow's former enforcer, the man with the scarred throat who'd led the first group threatening her. He'd been sentenced to 5 years for his part in the attack, but prison hadn't cooled his hatred. "He's not alone," Hartley continued. "Picked up some hard cases along the way. Word is he blames you folks for Crow's death, for his time behind bars. Man like that, eating revenge for months. He won't stop until he's settled scores." "How many?" Ethan's voice was steady, already calculating defenses. 4, maybe 5, all armed, all dangerous." Hartley glanced at his deputies. "I can leave men here." "No." Ethan shook his head. "Your deputies have families. This is our fight." "Ethan," Clara started, but he caught her hand. "We've rebuilt once. We can do it again if we have to, but I won't have other men's blood on our land," Hartley argued. But Ethan remained firm. Finally, the sheriff left extra ammunition and a promise to return with reinforcements at first light. As their horses disappeared into the snow, Clara turned to her husband. "You should have accepted help." "Maybe, but something tells me Grimes won't wait for dawn. He knows Hartley warned us, knows help might come." Ethan checked his rifle, movements precise and calm. "He'll hit us tonight, in the storm. It's what I'd do." They prepared as they had before, but this time was different. The cabin was stronger, better positioned, with clear fields of fire, and they were different too, tested, proven, united in a way that went beyond words. As darkness fell, the snow increased, turning the world into a white void. Ethan doused all but one lamp, positioning Clara at the back window while he took the front. "Remember," he said, "they'll use the storm as cover. Don't shoot at shadows. Wait until you're sure." "I remember." She checked her rifle one more time. "Ethan, whatever happens." "Nothing's happening to us," he cut her off. "We've come too far to lose now." The attack, when it came, was both expected and shocking in its ferocity. The first sign was the horses in the barn, sudden frightened neighing cut short. Then shadows moved against the white, barely visible until they were almost at the cabin. "Here they come," Ethan shouted, firing through the gun port they'd built into the door. A scream answered his shot, but return fire exploded from multiple directions. Windows shattered, splinters flew from wooden walls. Clara fired steadily from her position, forcing attackers back from the rear approach. "How's your ammunition?" Ethan called. "Good for now." She ducked as bullets whined overhead. "But they're spreading out, trying to flank us." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then came an ominous silence. broken only by the wind and Clara's harsh breathing. "Grimes," Ethan shouted. "This doesn't bring Crow back. Walk away while you can." "You took everything from me." "Cole," Grimes's voice came from somewhere near the barn. "My employer, my reputation, my freedom. Now I take everything from you." Fire arrows began arcing through the snow. Most fell short or hit the snow-covered roof, but one found its mark in the wood pile stacked against the cabin's north wall. "The wood's caught." Clara spotted flames beginning to spread despite the snow. "If it reaches the wall—" "I know," Ethan made a quick decision. "Cover me. I'm going to push the pile away from the cabin." "That's suicide." "Not if you're as good a shot as I think you are." He smiled grimly. "On 3, 1, 2. On 3, Ethan burst through the door. Clara fired rapidly, her shots keeping attackers' heads down. She saw Ethan reach the burning wood pile, saw him straining to push it away from the wall. Then Grimes appeared from behind the well, rifle raised. "No," Clara's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around, but not before he fired. Ethan grunted, staggering, but managed to shove the burning wood clear before stumbling back toward the door. Clara kept firing, covering his retreat, her heart hammering as she saw the dark stain spreading on his side. He collapsed inside, Clara slamming the door behind him. "How bad?" "I've had worse," he gritted out, though his face was pale. "Just keep them off us." The attackers, emboldened by Ethan's wound, pressed harder. Clara found herself running between windows, firing, reloading, firing again. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of combat. Everything Jake had made her fear about herself, the anger, the violence now channeled into protecting what she loved. When a man tried to climb through the broken back window, she met him with the butt of her rifle, feeling his nose break under the impact. When another rushed the door, she put 2 bullets through the wood, dropping him on the threshold. "That's my girl," Ethan managed, propped against the wall, adding his fire to hers despite the blood seeping between his fingers. Then, just as their ammunition ran low, came salvation. War cries split the night once more as Broken Arrow's warriors materialized from the storm. But this time, they weren't alone. Sheriff Hartley and a dozen townsmen rode with them, having decided that waiting for dawn was fool's play. The remaining attackers, caught between the cabin and this new force, threw down their weapons. It was over in minutes, the pristine snow trampled and stained, the night's violence ending as suddenly as it had begun. "Medic," Hartley shouted. "We need Doc Morrison out here." As men secured prisoners and tended wounded, Clara knelt beside Ethan, pressing cloth against his wound. His hand covered hers, weak but warm. "Told you," he whispered. "Nothing was happening to us." "Stubborn man," she said, tears running down her face. "You're not allowed to die on me. Ethan Cole. We have a life to build." "Not planning on it. Too much to live for." Doc Morrison arrived with a second wave of reinforcements, working by lamplight to clean and stitch Ethan's wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing vital organs by inches. "He'll live," the doctor announced, "but he'll need careful nursing. Good thing he married a strong woman." As dawn broke gray through the thinning snow, the full cost became clear. Grimes was dead, along with 2 of his men. The survivors would hang for their crimes. The cabin, though damaged, stood firm. "You did it again," Hartley said, shaking his head as he surveyed the scene. "Took on odds that would break most folks and came out standing." "We had help," Clara said, nodding to where Broken Arrow sat his horse, watching silently. The Apache leader inclined his head. "The debt was paid before. This time, we came as neighbors." He looked at the damaged cabin, the blood-stained snow. "Your enemies learn slowly that this land is no longer easy prey. Perhaps now they will learn faster." As the various groups departed, Clara and Ethan were left alone in their battered home. She helped him to bed, then sat beside him, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. "Clara," he murmured during one lucid moment. "I'm here." "The cradle. Might need to make it bigger. Sturdy stock. Us Coles and Monroes, our children will be fighters." She laughed through fresh tears. "Rest now. We'll talk of children when you're not half delirious from blood loss." But as she watched him sleep, one hand on his chest to feel each steady breath, the other pressed to her own belly where new life might already be taking root, Clara felt something she'd never expected: peace. They'd been tested by fire twice now and emerged stronger each time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the violence of the night in pristine white. By spring, the bloodstains would be gone, the bullet holes patched, the burned wood replaced, but the story would remain, growing with each telling, becoming legend. The woman who'd fled one violent man had become someone who stood against many. The soldier who'd failed to protect his first family had nearly died defending his second. Together, they'd proven that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in the killing, but in the surviving and choosing to build again on ground sanctified by sacrifice. As Clara kept her vigil through the long day, neighbors came, women with food and bandages, men with lumber and offers of help. Even Hobson the trader appeared, pressing a bottle of good whiskey into her hands for medicinal purposes. "You've given us something," Mrs. Paulson said as she helped Clara change Ethan's bandages. "Shown us we don't have to accept whatever the territory throws at us, that we can fight back, stand together." That night, as fever briefly took Ethan and he called out for his lost family, Clara held him close, whispering comfort. "They're at peace," she told him, "and they'd be proud of who you've become, of what we're building here." Whether he heard her or not, his restless movements calmed, and when morning came again, his fever had broken, his eyes clear as they found hers. "Still here?" he asked weakly. "Always," she promised. "No matter what comes." The worst was over. Grimes was dead. His vendetta with him, word would spread that the Cole Ranch was no easy target, that its defenders had allies both white and Apache. Perhaps there would be other challenges: weather, economics, the 1,000 natural shocks of frontier life, but no more night attacks, no more blood on prairie snow. They had won the right to live in peace, and that was worth any price. Part 7, Dawn After Snow. Spring came to the valley like a miracle, melting away the harsh winter and with it, the last vestiges of the violence that had marked their first year together. Clara stood in her garden, hands deep in the dark soil, planting seeds that would grow alongside the new life stirring within her. At 6 months pregnant, she moved carefully but with purpose, determined to see green things grow where blood had been spilled. "You should be resting," Ethan called from where he worked on the new barn, his movement still slightly stiff from his wound, but growing stronger each day. "The beans won't plant themselves," she replied, smiling at his perpetual concern. "And the baby seems to like it when I'm in the garden, settles right down." It was true. The child she carried seemed calmed by the rhythm of her work, by the peaceful routine they'd built from the ashes of chaos. Their days now followed the ancient patterns of farm life: planting, tending, building, mending. Simple work that felt sacred after so much destruction. The transformation wasn't just in their land. Deadwood Crossing itself had changed, the death of Silas Crow creating a void that better people had rushed to fill. Sheriff Hartley ran the town with a fair hand, supported by a council that included Mrs. Paulson and Tom Martinez. The saloon still operated, but without the rigged games and watered whiskey. Even relations with the Apache had improved, with Broken Arrow's people trading freely at the Saturday market. Mrs. Cole. Young Timothy Morrison came racing up the path, the doctor's son serving as message runner for pocket money. "Ma'am, you got visitors coming, fancy carriage and everything." Clara straightened, one hand going to her back, Fancy carriages usually meant lawyers or land speculators. Neither particularly welcome, but Ethan was already walking over, rifle casually in hand but ready. The carriage that rolled up was indeed fancy, painted black with gold trim, pulled by matched grays that had never known plow harness. The man who stepped down was equally out of place Eastern-cut suit, polished boots, carrying a leather case that screamed legal documents. Mr. and Mrs. Cole. His voice held Boston breeding. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, attorney at law. I represent the estate of one Silas Crow. Clara felt ice in her veins, but Ethan's hand on her elbow steadied her. Crow's been dead 6 months, Ethan said evenly. What's his estate want with us? May we speak inside? What I have to discuss is delicate. They led him to the cabin, Clara serving coffee while keeping her ears sharp. In her experience, lawyers meant trouble wrapped in fancy words. I'll be direct, Whitmore began, setting out papers. Silas Crow died without legitimate heirs. His estate has been in probate, complicated by numerous claims against it. However, during our investigation, we discovered something interesting. He pulled out a document. Are you aware, Mrs. Cole, that your late husband Jake Monroe had a life insurance policy? Clara nearly dropped her cup. Jake couldn't have had insurance. We could barely afford food. Ah, but he did. Taken out by Mr. Crow himself, with premiums paid from your husband's supposed debt. Quite illegal. Of course, one cannot insure the life of a debtor for profit. But Crow apparently expected to collect when your husband's drinking finally killed him. But Jake died in a bar fight, Clara said slowly. Indeed, a fight instigated by one of Crow's own men, according to witness testimony we've gathered. Whitmore's thin smile held no warmth. It seems Mr. Crow was impatient for his payout. Murder, Mrs. Cole. Your husband was murdered for insurance money. Clara sank into her chair, Ethan's hands gripping her shoulders. All those months of blaming herself for not mourning Jake properly, for feeling relief at his death, and now to learn he'd been killed like a cow for slaughter. Why tell us this? Ethan's voice was dangerous. What's your game, lawyer? No game, Mr. Cole. Justice, albeit the kind that comes with paperwork rather than gunfire. Whitmore spread more documents. The insurance company has agreed to pay out the policy to Mr. Monroe's widow $20,000. Additionally, they're pursuing criminal action against Crow's associates who were party to the fraud. $20,000. More money than Clara had imagined existed. Enough to build a proper ranch, to secure their children's future, to never worry about debt again. There must be conditions, she managed. Only one. You must agree not to pursue civil action against Crow's estate for damages related to the attacks on your property. The estate executors want to close all books, settle all claims. They offer an additional $5,000 to rebuild what was destroyed. Clara looked at Ethan, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. They could fight this, demand more, drag it through courts for years, or they could take what was offered and build forward instead of looking back. We'll need to read everything carefully, Ethan said, but if it's as you say, we're inclined to accept. Whitmore nodded, gathering his papers. I'll leave these for your review. I'm staying at the hotel in town should you have questions. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I've investigated Crow's dealings thoroughly. You folks weren't the only ones he destroyed. At least you fought back. That took courage. After he left, Clara and Ethan sat in stunned silence. Finally, she laughed, short and sharp. Jake finally did right by me, took dying and insurance fraud to do it, but still. How do you feel about it? Ethan asked carefully. Like the world's gone mad, but also, she pressed both hands to her swollen belly. Like maybe there's justice after all, just not the kind we expected. They signed the papers 3 days later, after having Sheriff Hartley and the bank manager review everything. The money, when it came, felt surreal numbers in a bank book that meant security, possibility, future. But the real changes were smaller, more personal. Clara hired 2 young men, brothers named David and Michael Sawyer, to help with the ranch work. Their first task was expanding the vegetable garden, Clara directing from a chair Ethan had built specially for her comfort. "Going to feed the whole valley?" David asked, surveying the ambitious plot. "Maybe," Clara replied. "A lot of families still struggling after last year's troubles. Full belly makes for peaceful neighbors." She also commissioned a bell from the blacksmith, installing it on a post where it could be heard across the valley. "For emergencies," she explained, "but also for celebrations, for calling community together." The birth came with summer heat, Clara laboring through a long night while Ethan paced and Doc Morrison worked with calm efficiency. When dawn broke, it brought twins, a boy and a girl, squalling with healthy lungs. "Fighters, like their parents," Morrison declared, handing the cleaned babies to their stunned father. They named them Mary and James for the family lost and the future found. Mary had Ethan's dark hair but Clara's stubborn chin. James had his mother's green eyes, but his father's quiet watchfulness, even as a newborn. The whole town seemed to celebrate their arrival. Gifts poured in hand-sewn blankets, carved toys, enough preserved food to last months. Even Broken Arrow's people sent presents, soft deer-hide clothes and a cradleboard decorated with protective symbols. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mrs. Paulson said, cooing over the babies during one of her many visits. "Apache and settlers celebrating children together. You two have changed this valley." But the biggest change was in Ethan and Clara themselves. Parenthood softened edges that violence had sharpened. Ethan would sit for hours with a baby in each arm, telling them stories of their Aunt Mary's bravery, of their grandparents' strength. Clara found herself humming lullabies her own mother had sung, melodies she'd thought beaten out of her by years of hardship. One evening, as purple dusk settled over the valley, they sat on the porch Ethan had added to the cabin. The twins slept in their cradles while their parents watched fireflies dance over the garden. "Year ago, I was ready to die in that burned forest," Ethan said quietly. "Thought I had nothing left to give the world but violence. And I thought I was only good for being someone's victim," Clara added. "Now look at us, parents, landowners, part of a community that actually works." "You sorry we didn't take the quiet life could have sold out after Crow died, moved somewhere civilized?" Clara laughed. "Civilized is overrated. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on things here. Make sure the next Silas Crow thinks twice before preying on folks." A rider appeared on the road, and old instincts had both reaching for weapons before they recognized young Timothy Morrison again. "Evening, Mr. and Mrs. Cole," the boy called. "Sheriff wanted you to know that Eastern company that wanted to buy your land, they're buying the old Crow place instead. Planning to run cattle, but fair-like, even offered to hire local men." "Progress," Ethan murmured after the boy left. "Coming whether we want it or not. Then we'd best help shape it." Clara said practically, "Make sure it's the kind of progress that helps folks instead of grinding them down." As if in agreement, little Mary stirred in her cradle, making the soft sounds that preceded hungry crying. Clara rose to tend her, movements confident with new motherhood. Ethan followed with James, who always woke when his sister did. Later, with the babies fed and settled, Clara and Ethan stood together looking out at their land. The garden flourished, green rows promising abundance. The new barn stood solid against the sky. In the distance, lights from other homesteads dotted the darkness, neighbors who'd become friends. A community forged in crisis but sustained in peace. "My parents would have loved this," Ethan said softly. "Seeing the land come back, seeing it full of life again." "They do see it," Clara replied with quiet certainty. "Every time you tell the babies about them, every time we choose building over burning, they're here in what we've made from what we lost." The bell they'd installed caught moonlight, a silver promise in the darkness. Tomorrow it might ring for emergency or celebration, for gathering or warning. But tonight it stood silent, watching over a valley at peace. Inside, the twins slept in their hand-carved cradles. Outside, the garden grew in soil enriched by ash and watered with hope. And in between, two people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances discovered daily that the best of circumstances were the ones you built yourself. Board by board, seed by seed, choice by careful choice. Dawn would come, as it always did in the territories, bringing work and weather, challenges and chances. But for now, in the quiet afterstorm, they had this each other, their children, their land, their future stretching out like the valley itself, vast and full of possibility. Part 8. Holding Sin. 5 years had passed since the night of fire and blood. The coal ranch now sprawled across the valley like a testament to stubborn hope. Proper fences marking pastures where cattle grazed. A 2-story house standing where the cabin once fought for survival. Barns and outbuildings speaking of prosperity hard won. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching 5-year-old Mary and James play in the yard under the watchful eye of their younger sister, 3-year-old Elizabeth. The twins had inherited their parents' fierce spirits, while little Lizzie possessed a gentle wisdom that seemed to see through to the heart of things. "Mama, James is throwing dirt again," Mary's indignant voice carried clearly. "I'm planting seeds like Papa showed me." Clara smiled, drying her hands on her apron. Some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when they involved children and dirt. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Ethan returning from town with the Sawyer brothers and a new hand they'd hired. But as the riders crested the hill, Clara's practiced eye caught something wrong in their posture. Ethan rode stiff, his face dark with suppressed emotion. She met them in the yard, reading bad news in every line of her husband's body. What happened? Ethan dismounted slowly, gathering her hands in his. "There's been an incident in town. The Patterson family, you remember them? Homesteaders north of here. Someone burned them out last night. Killed Tom Patterson when he tried to defend his property." Clara's blood chilled. "Who?" "Group calling themselves the Regulators. Say they're cleaning out undesirable elements." His jaw clenched. "Started 2 weeks ago over in Cedar Ridge. Seems they've decided our valley needs regulating." The children had stopped playing, sensing adult tension. Clara sent them inside with Maria, the Mexican woman who helped with house and children, before turning back to Ethan. "It's starting again, isn't it? The violence?" "Maybe, but it's different this time." He pulled her close, speaking quietly. "We're not alone anymore. Sheriff Hartley's already organizing resistance. The Apache have agreed to help patrol, and half the town volunteered to ride guard on the outlying farms." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch where so many decisions had been made. The night was peaceful, crickets chirping, stars brilliant overhead. It seemed impossible that violence could touch this peace, but Clara had learned that evil often came when you least expected it. "I've been thinking," Ethan said finally, "about patterns, about how we keep building and someone keeps trying to tear down, about whether we're cursed to always be fighting." Clara considered her words carefully. "Remember what you told me once, that the land knows how to heal itself. I think people are the same. It just takes longer, and there's always some rot that needs cutting out first." "Speaking of cutting out rot," he smiled grimly, "Hartley wants me to join the mounted patrol, says my military experience would help. But you're worried about leaving us alone," Clara finished. "Except we're not alone anymore. We have the Sawyers, Maria, neighbors who'd ride to help at the first ring of our bell, and I'm not exactly defenseless myself." He chuckled at that. "No, you surely aren't. Saw you teach Mary to shoot the other day. Girl's got your eye. And James has your stubbornness. Lord help us when they're older." They sat in comfortable silence. Then Ethan spoke again. voice thoughtful. You know what strikes me 5 years ago? We were holding on to sin, me with guilt over my family, you with shame over Jake, holding it so tight it nearly killed us both. And now I wonder if that's what saved us. All that pain taught us to fight for what matters, to recognize evil when it comes calling, to stand up instead of lying down. He took her hand. We've been holding sin, Clara, but maybe that's what made us whole. She squeezed his fingers, understanding flowing between them without need for words. They'd built this life from broken pieces, and if new threats came, they'd face them the same way together, unbending, protecting what they'd earned. The next morning brought confirmation of their fears. Timothy Morrison, now a lanky teenager, arrived with news that the regulators had posted notices in town. They demanded that all foreign elements, meaning Mexican families and anyone who traded with the Apache, leave the valley within a week.
They what?
Clara's voice could have cut glass. Yes'm. Sheriff Hartley tore them down, but they put up more. Said anyone helping undesirables would be treated as enemies too. The boy shifted nervously. My PA wanted you to know, on account of Maria and all. After Timothy left, Clara found Maria in the garden with the children, teaching them Spanish words for the vegetables they tended. The woman's face was carefully blank, but Clara could see fear in her eyes. You know about the notices. Clara said it wasn't a question. Si, Senora, my cousin brought word. Maria's hands kept working, but they trembled slightly. Perhaps it would be better if you what leave? Clara's voice was fierce. Maria Gonzalez, your family, anyone wants to move you, they go through us first. Tears gathered in Maria's eyes. You would risk your children's safety for me. I'd risk their souls if I taught them to abandon family when trouble comes. Clara knelt beside her. You stay, we stand together. That's how we've always done it here. That afternoon, Ethan rode out with the patrol while Clara organized the ranch's defenses. The Sawyer brothers took rotating watches. Neighbor women came to stay, turning mutual protection into social visits. Even Broken Arrow's warriors increased their patrols, ghosts in the landscape watching for trouble. 3 nights later, trouble found them. Clara woke to the bell ringing not their own, but the Patterson place, or what was left of it. The frantic clanging spoke of desperation. Without hesitation, she was up and moving, rousing the house. Maria, keep the children safe. David, you're with me. Michael, guard the house. Mrs. Cole, Ethan said. Ethan's not here. She cut off David's protest. And neighbors need help. She rode hard toward the Patterson homestead, David beside her, rifles ready. They found chaos, the barn ablaze, masked riders circling the house where surviving Pattersons had barricaded themselves. Clara didn't hesitate. Her first shot took a rider from his saddle. David scattered the others momentarily. They pushed through to the house, Clara thinking tactically as Ethan had taught her. How many inside? She called to the defenders. 6 of us, came the reply. Women and children mostly. Hey, can you move? Sarah's hurt bad. Clara made a command decision. David, get them out the back while I keep these bastards busy. Ma'am. That's an order. She opened fire from the window, steady and methodical, making every shot count. The regulators, expecting easy prey, found themselves pinned down by accurate fire. Behind her, she heard David evacuating the family. Then hoofbeats, lots of them. For a moment, Clara's heart sank, thinking the regulators had reinforcements. But the war cry that split the night was Apache, and the riders who swept into the farmyard were Hartley's patrol. Ethan at the fore. The battle was brief but decisive. Caught between the house, the patrol, and Broken Arrow's warriors, the regulators broke and fled. Several didn't make it, including their leader, a man named Josiah Bramwell, who'd been buying up foreclosed properties. Seems our regulators were more interested in real estate than racial purity, Hartley observed, studying Bramwell's body. Run folks off, buy their land cheap. Old story, new tactics. As dawn broke, they tallied the cost. The Patterson barn was gone. Sarah Patterson badly burned but alive. 3 regulators dead, several wounded and captured. The valley's resistance had held, but at a price. "You shouldn't have come alone," Ethan told Clara as they rode home, though his tone held more pride than reproach.
I wasn't alone. I had David, and I knew you'd come.
She smiled tiredly.
Besides, someone once told me we stand together. That includes standing for neighbors. Back at the ranch, they found the children awake, full of questions.
Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. How did you explain hatred to innocence? How did you teach them to be good while preparing them for evil?
Sometimes,
Ethan said carefully, gathering the children close.
People get scared of what's different. That fear makes them do bad things. Our job is to stand up to that fear, to protect each other. Like you protected us from the bad men before,
Mary asked, wise beyond her years.
Just like that,
Clara confirmed. And like you'll protect others when you're grown. I'll protect Lizzie, James declared, and Maria, and everyone.
Me too,
Mary added, then paused.
Can girls be protectors too?
Clara smiled.
Girls can be anything they're strong enough to become, and you, my fierce one, are plenty strong.
The regulator threat faded as quickly as it had risen. With their leader dead and their scheme exposed, the survivors scattered. Some were caught and tried. Others simply vanished into the vast territories. The valley returned to peace, but watchful peace, the kind that knew evil could wear new faces but had the same black heart. Years flowed by like the river that fed the valley. The children grew tall and strong. Mary became the sharpshooter Clara had predicted, while James showed a gift for working the land. Elizabeth surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, to help people learn better than fighting. Ethan's hair showed silver at the temples now, and Clara found laugh lines around her eyes. They'd built not just a ranch, but a legacy, a place where different peoples could work together, where justice meant more than law, where standing up mattered more than standing apart. On their 15th wedding anniversary, they sat on that same porch, watching sunset paint the valley gold. Their land stretched far as the eye could see, not just property, but community. Not just acres, but home. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, taking her hand.
Clara considered. They bore scars, inside and out. They'd known loss and pain, had killed to defend what they loved. They'd held sin close and transformed it into strength. Not one, she said finally. Every choice led us here, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones.
"We've been holding sin." He repeated his words from years ago. "But maybe that's what made us whole." "No," Clara corrected gently.
"We've been holding each other. That's what made us whole."
As darkness settled over the valley, lights began appearing in windows across the land, neighbors and friends, fellow survivors and builders. The bell stood silent on its post, tarnished now but strong. It had rung for emergencies and celebrations, for gatherings and farewells. It would ring again. Clara knew, for their children's weddings, for grandchildren's births, for all the life yet to come. But tonight, in the peaceful darkness, with her husband's hand warm in hers and their children safe inside, Clara needed no bells. She had everything worth fighting for, everything worth dying for, everything worth living for. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The West had made them, tested them, scarred them, but it had also given them this love forged in fire. Family built on foundations of courage, a future wrestled from an unforgiving land. They'd held sin and found redemption. They'd held pain and discovered joy. They'd held each other and created a world. As the stars emerged overhead, vast and eternal, Clara smiled. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, as tomorrows always did, but tonight she was simply a woman on a porch with the man she loved, holding not sin,
but possibility. Not guilt, but gratitude. Yes, she whispered to the night, to him, to all they'd built and become, right here. And it was, thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night, like this video, and don't forget to hit the hype button so this story can reach and touch more listeners. Your support means everything.